The evening turned out much better than she expected. Eva Terry and her date had arranged an exquisite dinner in South Beach, Miami. And it wasn't so much the dinner as the company she kept. Braxton Peregrine admired Eva. She was a middle-aged woman running the family perfume business where he worked. Braxton, who was 24, had just joined the firm as an entry-level accountant. This year, Eva singled out Braxton from the herd of new hires, as she often did when she was looking for a new partner to play with. She was tired of her husband, even though they had only been married for a little over 2 years. He was the CFO of the family business, boring but, in Eve's opinion, stable. He was fun to be with once every few weeks, but in Eva's opinion, he was nothing more than a support staff. Eva's husband Martin was tall, 5'2", and trim. He was in good physical shape thanks to his daily swimming, but in Eva's opinion, he was never anything more than a numbers counter. She never criticized his looks and was even proud to be his wife in private with their friends and significant others. But he didn't have a face that could be used for the public appearances necessary to sell the brand. He had no style or flair. He was much better off behind the scenes. She supposed that was why she had married him in the first place. She needed to manage her finances and love and support a good man to succeed. Not that she didn't love him, but she needed a younger man. Constantly in the spotlight thanks to television commercials and magazine ads, even at 45 she was very successful in both business and personal life. She had a model-like appearance, blonde hair, impeccably applied makeup, and stylish clothes. She looked like a younger version of Andie MacDowell. Her extracurricular adventures before her marriage to Martin were carefully concealed. Braxton was her new attempt to find a new partner. It was their first date and first affair in her marriage, and she was testing how clear those waters were. Of course, Braxton had been vetted by her personal security team. They'd done a thorough background check on him to uncover any hidden flaws, just as she'd done with all the other young men in her life. So far, with the exception of one failed long-term relationship in college, he looked clean and pure. Perhaps he could be bribed if it came to that, but overall he was untainted. How pleasant it was for Eve to be reminded of this when reading the report. Eve intended to study Braxton even after the report. For an accountant, he was extremely charming. When she had accidentally walked into the accounting office one afternoon to check something with Martin, he had shown her a deferential manner that had attracted her at once. He was very handsome, broad-shouldered, dressed in a fashionable suit. He was cheerful and fashionable, unlike her husband Martin, who seemed to wear suits designed in the '80s. Martin married Eva because he was in love with her. It didn't hurt that he thought she was the most beautiful and intelligent woman in the world. She was a very powerful executive in the competitive fragrance industry. She seemed to be very much in love with him as he was with her. They dated for almost a year before he got down on his knee and proposed. She had accepted right away. Martin had no intention of working for her, but the timing of their engagement seemed like the right time for him to take a more active role in the business. The company was trying to convert some of its long-term debt into private equity. Martin provided invaluable assistance, completing the transaction without any problems. He was very proud when Eva appointed him CFO, and he was honored to be called Eva's husband. Of course, he knew about her affairs with younger men even before their engagement. They had even discussed it at length after their engagement and subsequent marriage. Eva had assured him that all such liaisons had ceased. After all, she hadn't been married before, so her past affairs were her own. In the back of his mind, Martin suspected that she might continue her affairs with younger men, but he hoped that would not be the case. Despite his misgivings, he made the decision to marry them. He was willing to trust Eva and ignore her past behavior. But he was also prepared for the future should Eva's selfishness and womanizing tendencies manifest themselves again. He made it clear to Eva that fidelity to the marriage was paramount to its continuance. When they married, he was 39 and she was 43. During the first year of marriage, they recreated their honeymoon. Both Martin and Eva never seemed to want anything more. Martin certainly suspected his beloved wife of constant spontaneous liaisons, but he never admitted these feelings for Eva to anyone. Of course, he could neither prove nor disprove their existence. It was only a feeling based on Eva's past behavior. At the beginning of the second year, Eva gave signs that the lava of her affair with Martin was cooling. Martin again questioned her fidelity, but of course he could never prove anything. Eva, as CEO, held all the important cards, including unlimited access to all systems, personal and private. There couldn't be any secrets she didn't know about or could find out about if she wanted to. The house the couple lived in was quite large for the two of them, over 5,000 square feet. If it were up to Martin, they'd put the money they spent on the house, cleaning and upkeep, into a 401k or other deferred investments. He would be happy in a condo. Being a married couple, he didn't need such luxurious surroundings, with a cook, maid, and butler. He did, however, enjoy using their pool on a daily basis. The pool was indoor and overlooked the grounds of their immaculately maintained Miami home through clear glass. The pool, located partially inside the house, was Martin's pool. Outside was a luxurious pool with a built-in hot tub heated by solar panels. The pool was an extravagant thing, but Martin thought it was worth splurging on. He took meticulous care of it every week, checking the condition of the water and adding chemicals as needed. No caretaker or pool boy was required to maintain the pool. He paid special attention to the pH level of the pool so his dark brown hair wouldn't turn green like the pools he remembered from high school and college. It was the start of a new year of fragrances that began in June 2010 and garnered media attention. The company had just released a new fragrance before the buying frenzy that accompanied the start of the vacation season in the fourth quarter, which fueled everyone's interest. The fragrance seemed like a hit worth its weight in gold. Several celebrities picked up the line and began promoting it throughout the summer months. When commercials and print ads with Ava as the model appeared in late September, the product took off like a rocket. Perhaps it was this rocket effect that caused the proverbial marriage cart to have its wheels fall off. Ava was out of the house, but she was in her element, the center of attention. She was constantly promoting her line of merchandise. There were weeks when Martin didn't see her. Then he reasoned that it was just business, but he still remained convinced that Eva was not firm in her commitment to monogamy. He could never say exactly who or when, but he strongly suspected something was going on. She was too beautiful a woman not to attract male attention. He kept an eye on the financial aspects of the business and knew enough about the frequency of sales to keep from guessing when they'd have a new hit on their hands, but decided he needed to do something about his personal life. He hadn't decided what course to take yet. When Eva returned after Thanksgiving from her 30-day roadshow, as she called it, she was exhausted. She had slept in their bedroom for almost 36 hours. Attentive to her needs, Martin showered her with love and affection. To him, it seemed like something unreal. His wife, with whom he had lived for just over 2 years, was a mystery to him. Beautiful, but terribly needy in times of depression. She longed to be the center of attention, yet enjoyed Martin's care in the comfort of their own home. As he cared for his wife, his sense of her deception eased a little. Martin knew that her frantic promotion schedule was coming to an end as the holiday season drew to a close. He looked forward to spending the Christmas break with his wife to reignite the embers that had been dying down since the beginning of summer. Sure, Martin kept in touch with his wife while she toured the US and Europe, promoting the new line, but doubts about her fidelity constantly plagued him. While she was away, Martin installed spot micro cameras throughout the house. Their locations remained a mystery to him until he reviewed their recordings one evening before Eva returned. But even then, given the camera's ability to follow, zoom in on, and focus on an object, determining their exact location was nearly impossible. One evening, after the cameras were set up, he watched a man walk through the front door and was able to make out that his fly was partially down. Embarrassed, he decided that the cameras would be sure to capture all of their adventures in the house. The quality of the video was amazing, but the sound quality was even better. Together, they constituted a top-notch security system that had to do its job. Martin had long believed that Eva's adventures took place during her travels, but he hadn't ruled out that they also took place in their home. This tentative attempt to observe the house was Martin's first attempt to learn about her adventures or to get information about whether they were happening elsewhere. Their work schedule was such that they rarely had lunch or saw each other after coming to work, so Eva could easily slip away for an afternoon lunch at home with anyone. Each room in their house was equipped with its own 3-camera system with battery backups in case of a power outage for recording. The video was streamed over the internet to a central computer in the cloud. Each camera had its own memory card capable of storing 24 hours of video and audio. All of them were wirelessly synchronized with the main computer in the cloud, to which only Martin had the password. Special software allowed you to view images from each room on split screens, as well as click and zoom in on any particular channel. It was elegant yet simple. When Martin finished replaying him entering their house with his fly-down, switching between the various cameras, he hadn't hoped or expected to catch Eva engaging in lewd behavior. It was just his cautious way of anticipating anything that might happen. The videotape of the CEO being caught in the act with his mistress would have made tabloid editors drool if they had learned of its existence. Martin hoped that this threat alone would be enough to make Eva realize the consequences. After the holidays, when Eva was absent from dinner several times, Martin began to feel anxious again. He was glad for the cameras. They celebrated Christmas with lots of presents and a love life, as if they were back on their honeymoon. When they returned to work after the holidays, Martin felt that Eva had changed, but the cameras and audio recordings made him feel nothing but love and affection, and Martin reviewed the files daily. In late January, Eva asked him to visit a factory in China to make sure the recordings and quality control were up to company standards. Martin suspected her request was a new rat in the pack, but bit his tongue and agreed to the trip. He would be gone for 2 weeks, certainly long enough for Eve to bring one of her conquerors into the house for fun and games, and he would be comfortably out of the country. This time, however, he decided I would have the cameras. Eva had plans of her own after Martin left for the East at the end of January. She planned to take Braxton out to dinner tonight, but at her home, not at one of the fancy restaurants on South Beach. She didn't think it was necessary to seduce Braxton after all. He had let her know he was interested in playing the game himself during their last dinner. She liked it when her lovers came to her on their own. It gave her a sense of control and power over the situation. Braxton knew he wanted Eve and was determined to get her. Her husband Martin, his boss, was nothing to him. He was not physically intimidating. He considered himself the stronger man. Eve called Braxton into her office mid-afternoon after Martin's early morning departure. Braxton, wasting no time, arrived and proceeded inside before Eve's assistant allowed him to enter. Eve liked her men to be prompt and run errands at her convenience. Braxton, thank you for your promptness. I'll get right to the point. Would you join me for dinner at my home this evening? I'd like to get the sales figures for our new flavor for the last quarter. Please come by 7 o'clock and bring the sales charts. You're welcome. And yes, I'll be sure to bring all the sales figures. From what I've seen, you've done a great job promoting. Great job, Mrs. Terry. Thank you, Braxton. Please call me Eva when it's just the two of us. Like tonight when we're having dinner and going over the numbers. Please take the address from my assistant when you leave. Braxton withdrew. He was a little concerned that there wasn't more flirting, especially after their last date had gone so well. Perhaps she needed to maintain an office cover to avoid the possibility of being discovered when someone's quill dipped into her inkwell. Whatever the case, Braxton knew what was going to happen this evening. She wanted him. He could feel it in the way she licked her lips several times as she spoke. She carelessly twirled a small lock of hair around her neck and her fingers as if it were bait. She was like a tigress twirling her tongue while looking at a moose. This was Eva's way of trying not to draw attention to herself and to be modest. Eva had an entire security team assigned to her, watching her every move. They did this electronically and physically. Martin didn't know that she checked the house monthly for electronic devices, but he was well aware of her physical security. Her security had discovered the cleverly placed cameras shortly after Martin had installed them. In Eva's opinion, it would be unwise to expose them. Instead, she asked that they be temporarily disabled, as she did not want Martin to learn of their discovery. In her opinion, this was advantageous as it allowed her to control the information. Besides, Martin thought she was being chased. It was too good to be true, she thought. She could use his own observations to prove she was chased. Martin would never suspect anything. The security director had advised against leaving them active, as it could cause even more concern if the signal became white-hot. However, he had provided a device that essentially jammed the wireless transmission from the cameras, which was what had led to what he was talking about. She wondered what Martin might have actually said. Honey, I know you're cheating on me, but my cameras must have malfunctioned, so I have no proof. Eva laughed out loud. Her laughter was evil. She ordered a jammer to be installed. Arriving home at 4:30, Ava relaxed in the tub with a glass of Chardonnay. The relaxing murmur of jets, warm water, and bubbles put her in a state of euphoric bliss. At 5:30, she stepped out of the tub and threw on a robe. Eva was completely relaxed. She had already had the cook prepare dinner and wanted to make sure everything went according to plan. Besides, she needed to restock the wine. She could have called for the butler, but preferred to do it herself. "Martha, I hope everything is ready for dinner tonight," Eve announced as she entered the kitchen. Announced Eve 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 as she entered the kitchen. In the adjoining dining room, she saw a table set for two, with candles as she had requested. The dishes were arranged perfectly. Among the main courses and side dishes were lobster bisque, crisp wedge salad sprinkled with blue cheese, and baked Chilean sea bass with almond string beans. This was one of Eva's favorite dishes. The fish had notes of lemon and rosemary, which paired perfectly with the wine she had chosen. Martha brought her up to speed and explained everything that was going on in the kitchen. All the food was ready. Eva only needed to turn on the ovens and burners at the right time and dinner would be sumptuous. Eva was sure Braxton wouldn't mind helping her serve a few plates while they sipped wine while dinner was being prepared. This evening, Eva was in a devilish mood. Around 6:15 p.m., she decided to head back to the bedroom to get dressed for the evening. She flicked the remote control, which emitted a quiet beeping sound that meant that all of Martin's cameras in the house were turned off. Any prying eyes or camera would have seen the snow. Dinner with a new client was on her calendar. Now that the cameras were off, a very different scene played out in front of her. Sipping her wine, she stared at her closet, deciding what to wear. She finished dressing just as the doorbell rang, just before 7. Her boy was punctual. The cook and butler had long since left per her orders. Braxton looked ravishing. His shoes gleamed as if he had just shined them to a high shine. She invited him in. He brought a bottle of wine and flowers, which pleased her very much. It had never occurred to anyone but Martin, her caring husband, to bring her flowers. This touched her. None of her novels before her marriage had contained the element of romance, which she admitted was exciting. She offered him a drink, which he graciously declined, preferring sparkling water. She poured herself another generous portion of Chardonnay, which was to be the wine of the evening. She began to prepare the soup and checked Martha's instructions one last time to make sure everything was perfect. Martin had landed in Tokyo, Japan, and was waiting for his relatively short flight to Beijing, China, when his phone rang. He approached the gate for his final flight to China and decided to sit down with a glass of wine to review the message. The alert came from the cameras. As he studied the details, the cameras reported a glitch. He tried to log into the main server and found that the signal from the cameras was not reaching him. Puzzled, he called up an additional screen on the cameras. According to the app, they were on, but the only signal they were transmitting was white snow. Frustrated, Martin pressed all the buttons in the app, trying to find the cause of the problem. He even went into advanced mode, having never tried this before. In a rage, he pressed the button several times to no avail, nearly breaking his phone in the process. At the worst possible moment, the cameras didn't work. He abandoned the app and decided to personally speak to the security representative who advertised the equipment as bulletproof and demand a full refund. Eva and Braxton enjoyed soup, salad, and a meal, discussing sales figures over a pleasant dinner. Braxton had a glass of wine at dinner, but nothing more. Eve wondered if he was just looking out for himself or if he really didn't like drinking alcohol. It doesn't matter, she thought. If he behaved even half as well in bed as he did at dinner, he'd be worth it. "Braxton, are you interested in older women?" she asked. "Only if the older woman is you, Eve," he replied nonchalantly. "Well, since we have the same mutual interest, perhaps we should retire to my bedroom. I'm a little tired. It's been a long day and I'd like to see the sales projections for the first quarter." "What about your husband?" he asked quickly. "Martin?" She glanced at her watch. "He should be boarding his flight to Beijing soon." She replied easily. "Lead the way, my love." Martin took her hand. When they reached the master bedroom, Braxton froze in awe, marveling at the furnishings. This was also where they were doing it. Perhaps, she thought, He could be the long-term lover she thought she needed so badly. The thought of a long-term lover made her blush and shudder with fear. Guilt overwhelmed her. This was her first affair since her marriage. She was no longer a lonely socialite who cared about nothing in the world but her husband. Now she truly believed she knew what it meant to be married. While Braxton gathered his clothes, Eve whimpered quietly in bed. What had she done? Not only had she defiled herself, she had defiled her marriage. Martin had been her first marriage, by choice. She had never managed to find the perfect combination of man, intelligence, and charm. At least with Martin, she had found a man with brains. There wasn't much charm in him, but perhaps, she thought, she could work on his charm. Maybe he wasn't so bad after all. He had 2 virtues out of 3. And he really did love her, she thought. Who else would put up with the Hellcat after she'd come home from her month-long promotion? Who else would have helped her so much at the office and nursed her back to health after that long drive? Braxton took her hint. He said nothing as he left her bedroom. She saw his satisfied grin and smile as he closed the door. She knew he'd be back. He knew he'd be back too. He left his socks under the bed, wondering if the housekeeper would find them and throw them in the wash with her husband's laundry. Martin was just getting off the plane in China. He was still very excited that his expensive cameras had failed to do their job. He wondered what was going on back home. He thought about calling Eva, but dismissed the thought. It was past midnight in Miami. What could he find out from her? Nothing. Unless she said, "I had a great night and I had fun with a young stud." He doubted she would strike him as transparent or stupid. On the way to the hotel, Martin was sure that Eva, or rather her security team, had discovered the cameras. Somehow they had been disabled, but for what purpose? He could only suppose one possibility, and the thought made him shudder. If Eve was cheating on him, it would mean the end of the partnership he had carefully considered. Trust, honesty, and loyalty were the qualities he felt were most important in any relationship. His conversation with Eve before the wedding clearly demonstrated these qualities. However, with no absolute proof, Martin was left with only doubts and suspicions. Next time, there would be no doubts. Martin's visit to China went without much incident. He checked the figures, the assembly line, and observed the quality control inspectors. He knew the numbers were accurate. He imitated the flavors and the assembly line well, nodding when they talked to him and asking a couple of questions he'd adopted from Ava to make sure they weren't fooling him. But his Chinese hosts knew that Martin had no idea how fragrances were made. He left after 2 weeks. Only Ava knew of his arrival. He suspected that she would not be with him when he arrived, so he was very surprised to see her. As he was going through customs and heading to baggage claim, he noticed her running towards him in a very beautiful red dress that he had not seen before. She was dressed as if she had come from a publicity tour. Pearls, scarf, and impossibly high heels. She greeted him enthusiastically. "Marty, I'm so glad you're home. I've missed you so much." Wrapping her arms around his neck, she pressed her whole body against him and sank her lips into his in a deep kiss. Martin, for his part, was shocked but happy to be home. He had reciprocated her passion in the same way. Now he wondered if it was guilt on her part. He pulled away, breathing heavily. "I have missed you, too. To what do I owe such an ardent greeting?" he asked inquisitively. "I just missed you. Can't a wife miss her husband?" she said, pouting. "Of course. And I missed you, too. Have you eaten?" "Let's go home. Martha made dinner. I just want you to be alone tonight." Eva's eyes gave her away treacherously as she spoke. Martin could clearly see the guilt dancing in them. The cameras may have failed him, but her eyes spoke the truth. "Sounds great. What's for dessert?" he asked, raising his eyebrows. Eve smiled. "Me." Next chapter. Eva and Martin spent the rest of the weekend in bed, over meals and so on. It was like a honeymoon. Monday came and both couples got ready for another day of work. Over the weekend with Martin, Eva felt something she had never experienced with Braxton. Love. She felt wanted, protected, and safe. Their union throughout the weekend only confirmed the depth of devotion and care Martin felt for her. It was also clear how Braxton had used her the previous weekend like a cheap rented mule. Perhaps it was this duplicity that pointed out her flaws. She quickly pushed the thought away, not wanting to spoil her mood from a terrific weekend with her husband. Martin drove to work in his Ferrari. Eva hated that car. It was uncomfortable, noisy, and too fast for her tastes. Martin usually drove a Tesla, but he decided he hadn't started the Ferrari while he was away for 2 weeks, and she needed to stretch it to let the fouling out of the cylinders. Eva called for transportation to get to work. She couldn't bear to ride in Martin's Ferrari, but it was all for the best, she thought. She wanted to work on the email she'd ignored over the weekend while she showered Martin with love. Her plan seemed to work perfectly. She hadn't noticed anything from Martin that indicated his suspicions about Braxton coming to the house several times and spending the night last weekend before Martin arrived. Martin was also glad that Eva had decided not to go with him. He was puzzled as to why the cameras suddenly turned on the day after he left. He was a stickler for detail, and today he had invited the security company he had contracted with to find out what had really happened. He called on his way to work. He'd given the security firm a key for the initial setup, so there were no problems with access. All employees were off on Monday, so there would be no extra hassle. By late morning, he was informed that the cameras were working to specification. But the specialist reported that something unusual had been discovered when scanning the house today. Another electronic device with repeaters had been installed that was not there when originally installed. They didn't know what these devices were, but speculated that it might be some kind of interference that was interfering with the cameras. Martin immediately put two and two together and concluded that Eva's security team had discovered the cameras and somehow disabled them. Martin's heart clenched. He realized what the fact that Eva knew about the cameras could lead to. He was now certain that Eva was cheating on him in their own home. There could be no other explanation. If she had come to him and asked why the cameras were installed, he would have simply answered, for their personal safety. But she hadn't. She knew they were there and had deliberately turned them off. After lunch, he was going to take some preliminary steps to secure himself financially. Eve had asked her personal assistant to have Braxton meet her at the office at 10. Gina had worked with her for the past 10 years. Ever loyal, she made more money than most in the company. Her loyalty had been bought and paid for by Eve over the years, but Gina had guessed what was going on from the moment Braxton had first been called into Eva's office. She liked Eva, even dreamed of being like her someday, but what she was doing to her husband was just wrong. He had no idea that Eva had been screwing around with someone like Braxton, as she had with others before she was married. Gina hoped Martin wasn't quite aware of it, but she knew the corporate games went on and wished she had a way to warn him about his wife's extracurricular activities. He was always cordial to her, never spoke down to her. In her opinion, he treated everyone that way in general. He was friendly, outgoing, genuinely cared about people and company. She could see why Eva was partial to him. Martin was very trim, clean-shaven, with bright blue eyes. Even though he was a little older than her 35 years, she still considered him quite young. She even felt a slight shiver when he walked into Eve's place. Clothes weren't his best attribute, and she was sure Eve had brought that to his attention. But Gina believed there was always more to a man than his clothes. The man makes the clothes, not the other way around. At 9:55, Braxton was sitting next to her, ready for Eve. Unusual, she thought, that Eve hadn't asked him to bring props to make their meeting look more realistic. Was it really just a date? Surely Eve wouldn't just entertain Braxton in her office. Gina could have listened to the door, which would surely slam shut with Braxton's arrival. She could also have turned on the intercom and picked up the receiver as if she were carrying on a conversation. But that would be risky if Eve saw that the intercom light was still on. Eve rang the intercom. Gina answered immediately and invited Braxton inside. He opened, entered, and closed the door. She continued talking on the phone as the door closed and pressed the intercom button a second time. She knew she was taking a risk, but she was more curious to confirm her certainty that something was going on between Braxton and Eve. "Braxton, I'm afraid we're going to have to break off the relationship. Martin's back from China, and I don't want to take any more chances with you." Braxton fidgeted in his chair. "What if I don't want to? What if I want to keep having fun with the CEO of the company?" He said it loudly, almost loud enough for everyone outside of Eve's office to hear. "Braxton, poor soul. I hope you're just being cranky and not threatening me. Otherwise, this isn't going to lead to anything good." Eve lowered her voice, hoping Braxton would do the same. "Really? What if I let your husband, my boss, know about this past weekend? Wow, I didn't realize you thought so little of me and my feelings. I think you've won. Would you like to have a little fun here in my office?" Eve made a gesture with her hands across the desk. A somewhat stunned Braxton began to nod his head. You silly fool. I'm never coming to visit you again, much less in my own office. Who do you think you are? Please tell Martin whatever you want to tell him. It's your word against mine, and I can tell you who Martin will believe. Eva said it with determination, but felt herself trembling at her own words. Well, we'll see about that, Braxton hissed, stood up and headed for the door. Eve, who never backed down in the face of confrontation, said conspiratorially, Braxton, before you go, consider that our whole affair has been recorded. A little Photoshop and it'll look like you're obsessed with me, especially that first night. You bitch, shouted Braxton to her from across the room. Yes, and I'll admit that. But we broke up and so did you. I'd suggest you find your next assignment and leave the firm quietly if you know what's good for you. Eve turned her attention to the papers on her desk, dismissing Braxton. After listening to everything that was said, Gina calmly hung up the phone. Braxton slammed the door to Eve's office, startling Gina, who immediately rushed to Eve's phone. Eva, is everything okay? Should I call security? No, Gina, everything's fine. Just a little miscommunication about the direction the company is going. Nothing to worry about. But thanks for your concern. Braxton, Mr. Peregrine was disappointed with the outcome. If you're sure it's all right, can I get you anything? Perhaps a cup of tea? Actually, that would be wonderful. Thank you, Gina. You're the best. Gina went to make Eve some tea. She confirmed everything she thought. She also knew that Braxton was past it. Should she violate Eve's trust and warn Martin? She was torn between loyalty to her boss and decency to her husband, and between doing the right thing. Braxton tore out of here like he was sitting on spikes, Gina said, setting her tea on a coaster in Eva's office. Just a little misunderstanding, like I said. No need to worry about it. It was unfortunate, but the time has come. I guess Mr. Peregrine will have to look for work elsewhere. Wow, I didn't realize you knew all the details of what goes on even in the finance department, Eva. I'm impressed. But why didn't Martin handle it? Eva was starting to get a little annoyed at Gina and her questions. This was her company and everyone worked for her. And while she didn't have to explain, in this situation it would be better to try to calm Gina down rather than brush her off. Sometimes when suggestions are made but not listened to, it's best to nip them in the bud, which is what I did. I saw the situation developing and decided to act. Gina asked insistently, So Martin told him what needed to be done and he didn't? Eva sipped her tea slowly. Gina, thank you for the tea. I need to do some photo shoots. Please send Michelle over at 11 sharp if you don't mind. Thank you. Gina withdrew, as Eva usually did when the conversation ended. This did not please Gina. She walked gracefully out of Eva's office, but inside she was burning up. How dare that woman treat a good man like Martin like that? It wasn't fair. Back at her desk, Gina called Martin. Hi, Martin, it's Gina, she said in a whisper, even though no one could hear her. Could you meet me for lunch at 12:30? I need to talk to you. It's very important. Sure, Gina, how about Tres Amigos on 3rd Street? 12:30, you said? Yes, thank you, Martin. I'm sorry to be so quick, but we need to talk. No worries, Gina. I'll see you at 12:30. Next chapter. Martin was already sitting in a booth in the last row. He invited Gina in as soon as she walked through the door. The waitress appeared as soon as Gina took her seat. They both quickly ordered from the short lunch menu and easily decided to split the chicken fajita for two. Martin became curious. As soon as the waitress left, he asked, Gina, tell me, what was so important that we had to discuss over lunch? Gina took a sip of her iced tea and looked at Martin. He was handsome. But he was also married, Gina reminded herself. But maybe after she told him everything she knew, he'd want a divorce. You'll probably think less of me when I tell you, but I think too highly of you not to tell you. Now Martin was surprised and wary. Gina, you've always been loyal to Sasha, longer than I have. I always thought you had the company's best interest at heart. I never thought poorly of you as a professional in your field. That calmed Gina down a bit. She pulled herself together and proceeded to recount the results of the morning's meeting with Braxton Peregrine. Martin, I think Eva is having or has had an affair with Braxton Peregrine. I overheard their conversation this morning, which implied that Eva was ending her relationship with him. She said that since you were back from China, she couldn't risk you finding out about it. Martin was stunned. His worst thoughts and fears had been confirmed. He took a large sip of iced tea and said nothing, staring unseeingly at the table. It struck Gina that he showed no emotion. Then a thought occurred to her. Maybe he already knew? Before Martin could answer, a plate of lunch appeared on the table. He was grateful to be interrupted. The waitress had left. The silence was broken only by the sizzling of chicken fajitas for two in a cast iron skillet on the table between them. Martin looked Gina straight in the eye when he said, "Thank you." "Martin, what's wrong with you? Why are you thanking me? I just told you that your wife is having an affair. That's not at all what I expected you to say. Why aren't you angry, ready to kill the bellboy, your wife, or even Braxton?" Gina's voice rose with each question. "Gina, how long have you been working for Sasha?" Martin asked. "It was 10 years in December." "Why?" replied an excited Gina, but lowered her voice slightly to please Martin. "Just bear with me. I think it will all become clear soon." "How long have you been working for Eve?" 10 years. I've always worked for Eve." "Where is this going to lead to? I just told you your wife is having an affair and you're asking me how long I've been working here. I don't understand." "In all the years you've worked for Eve, has she had young men come and go at her whim?" "Yes," Gina replied, still very confused. "So what changed with Mr. Peregrine?" "So you're okay with Eva having young lovers?" "I'm sorry, I guess I just didn't realize you were. I was clearly overreacting. It won't happen again." "No, Gina, that's where you're wrong. You didn't overreact and I would never have let Eve have a lover." "What's different now?" Martin asked. "You're married. It's just not right." "Exactly. That's the difference. I'm married to a whore who can't stop letting men into her bed. And by the way, I don't mind Eve having a lover. Period. And she knows it. That's probably more than I need to know, but I think I see where you're going with this. Do you think she feels guilty?" "I know she does. She also feels vulnerable," Martin replied evenly. "So what are you going to do?" "For the rest of the day, nothing. I'm not going to do anything out of the ordinary. I'm going to stay in my office and come up with a plan to get out of a very uncomfortable marriage." "How can you be so calm, Martin? Seriously, I had a boyfriend a year or so ago who did something similar. And while I won't pretend to know how you feel since you're married, I was devastated. I spent the whole weekend eating ice cream from Starbucks and drinking White Russians to drown my sorrow." "Gina, I knew Eva before we were married. I mean, I knew about her lifestyle. I can't pretend I really knew her. She convinced me that she had changed, but I still had my doubts. She told me it was all in the past and she was ready to settle down with one man. She said that man was me. I believed her. I decided to trust her. She's a chameleon. She can change her spots depending on the environment." Martin continued, "Gina, I know you broke the rules today and honored me by telling me about it. For that, I will forever be in your debt. I'm going to share something with you, but I need your complete guarantee that you will never, ever tell anyone about what I tell you. Not even Eve. Can you keep this between us?" "Of course, it goes without saying." Gina blushed slightly and then stared off into the distance as if pondering. "But I seem to have betrayed Eve's trust by telling you her secrets today, so I guess I understand why you're asking." "Gina, I may not be a good judge of Eva's character, but I know I can trust you. I installed cameras in our house while Eva was on a publicity tour." A shocked Gina replied, "Why?" "I suspected that Eva was or might have been having an affair. All the signs were there. And when her tour ended and she sent me to China for a couple weeks, I was almost certain. The cameras would have provided evidence to confront her if she was having an affair." "What happened?" "I have to believe Braxton already knew about it." "Didn't the cameras show what you think? You must have already known everything I told you today." "I would have thought so too," Martin replied grimly. "But somehow Eva must have detected the cameras and installed technology in the house to somehow disable the equipment when she wanted to conduct her business in private. So she knew the cameras existed but blocked them on purpose. What a conniving bitch. I'm sorry, no offense. I had no idea. Do you think she actually recorded something? If you didn't see her, that's one thing. But maybe she was actually channeling the signal somewhere else instead of just blocking it." "You know, you're brilliant, Gina. I never thought of that. It's very subtle, but maybe there's some truth to what she said. I don't understand all the technology behind it, but I suppose it's possible. I'm going to call my security company back and have them take a closer look at those boxes. I was so pissed when I found out she knew about the cameras and had installed the technology to block them. I didn't think of other possibilities. Thank you." "Martin, I'm late, and I don't understand anything. I have to get back. But I think you've opened my eyes to things about Eve that I didn't even realize. I can't believe the depths to which she went to deceive you. I'm not the most righteous person in the world, but I can't watch Eve take advantage of a decent man like you. You're just too good a person. I'll keep our conversation today with me to my grave. Gina got up and quickly left. Martin stayed, had another glass of iced tea and paid the bill. He was in no hurry to get back to the office. Obviously, he had ceded Eve to another of her young toys, even if she had broken off her relationship with him. She would always think she had the upper hand and could get away with it. She might take a break for a while so as not to arouse suspicion, but he was sure she would revert back to the old Eve once things got back to normal. The fact that she had managed to hide her affair from the cameras was proof of that. Back in the office, Martin listened to the voicemail. Eva informed him that Braxton Perengrin was no longer working at Sasha's and he should prepare a resignation letter with the help of human resources. No reasons were given. Martin would have to make them up, which, given the circumstances, would not be difficult. He amused his wife. There should be a box on the form. Amused the boss's wife, he thought. At 5 o'clock, he called Braxton into his office. Braxton, it's come to my attention that you've been falsifying company expense reports. I'm afraid we have a zero-tolerance policy for employee theft. As of this moment, your employment is terminated. Please collect your personal belongings and leave the premises. You have 10 minutes. Security is outside and will make sure you only take your personal belongings. You stupid cuckold! You only do what your wife tells you to do, Braxton said. Excuse me? Martin replied without anger, simply questioning his last statement. You heard me loud and clear, you silly cuckold. I entertained your wife and now you're firing me to get out of your shitty marriage. You're right. I'm doing what my wife told me to do. I'm firing you. She's my boss. Thanks for confirming that you entertained Eve. I hope it was worth it. Martin again replied without emotion. You're a worthless coward. You know that, don't you? I've taken your wife to places you could only dream of. What does that say about you as a man? Braxton fired all his guns, but felt very strong, as if he still had Eve. That may be so, Braxton. We'll never know that, I guess. But what I do know is that you were fired with extreme prejudice, with no references, and with the preconception that you would never be hired in your field for the rest of your career because of the nature of embezzlement. It's never good when someone in accounting is accused of a financial crime against a corporation. It's not good for auditors and all that. And that's all you got? Some trumped-up charge of expense fraud? Braxton replied, but without much zeal. Well, and you've just admitted to a relationship with a senior member of the board of directors who happens to be my wife, yes. I suppose that's all I have. But I think that's enough, don't you? Don't you care about your wife, asshole? No, not particularly. Do you? Oh, I'm sorry. Did you think you were a big stud by taking her away from me? I guess I misunderstood your whole rant. Did you think you were taking away my prize? My prize? Martin replied impatiently. You mean to say that you are not angry with me and my wife for our affair? And that I can amuse her better than you can? You really are a cuckold. Braxton jerked back. No, I'm not angry at all. I'm even pleased. If you want, you can take Eve whenever you want. I don't think she was ever mine. I was just renting her. If you want her, call me anytime. She's all yours. Besides, she had a lot of studs, as you call yourself. Frankly, you're just another notch on her bed. I'm sure she's already forgotten about you and is looking for the next conqueror. Isn't that what she told you this morning? She may be beautiful, but keeping her is too expensive for my budget. By this point, Braxton was almost beyond excited. He decided he could challenge Martin to a fist fight, which he knew he would win by a wide margin. What swimmer could surpass him as a college wrestler? No one had even tried. I'll just clean up my desk. Braxton, one last piece of advice. You should take the test. I've never ridden a horse. Now get out of my office, you piece of scum. Martin said this with venom, even though he knew Eva was probably clean as a whistle. He had another surprise for Braxton. Braxton gathered his things and calmly, but still inwardly angry, walked out of the building. Once 20 yards from his car, he reached into his pocket for his key to unlock it. When he pressed the key fob button, the car exploded in a huge fireball. The car flew 5 feet off the ground and then settled back down to burn from the intense heat. Even the car's tires were on fire. If he had been a few feet closer, he realized, he would have died instantly. He had to admit that perhaps he had entertained the wrong woman and pissed off a very powerful enemy in the form of her husband. Next chapter. The weekend passed quietly for Eva and Martin. She was able to treat Braxton's misfortune with his car as bad luck. Martin was not himself. She tried unsuccessfully to approach him on Saturday. Martin remained cold all Sunday. Eva realized something was wrong and suspected she knew what it was. She decided not to disturb the hive. Perhaps if she put Marty out of her mind, things would go back to normal. She believed that Braxton had kept his promise and told Martina about their affair. If Marty hadn't opened up to her, she had to assume that he knew. Braxton wasn't about to run away from Martin Terry in fear. He knew that Eve would soon want him back in her bed. All weekend he had been thinking about Eva. He wanted her more than any other woman he had ever met. He couldn't understand it. There was something unattainable about her that he craved. Yes, she was married to her shitty husband, but that didn't matter to him. She wanted to be submissive. She wanted to bend to his will. He didn't care about his 2-year-old Honda. The fire department was having fun putting the car out of its misery. The insurance company would buy him a new car. The police did a cursory investigation, but found nothing significant except a few charred wires burned in an arc near the fuel pump as the likely source of the explosion. Martin had been planning. He was working. He always did. He was going to do maximum damage to Eva and her boy toy. He was going to take over the company by making Gina its new face. A simple mousetrap would be his savior. A simple mousetrap would save his future. But it would also save his sanity. All his plans to install expensive cameras had proved futile. But he knew now that Ava would never remain faithful to her marriage if given time. And Martin had time. He drove himself into a frenzy at work. Week after week he worked until he couldn't work anymore. Eva clung to him like a sycophant. But he remained adamant and only mumbled words of courtesy to her. He showed her no affection or emotion. He began to grow weak. Eva was so beautiful. It took every ounce of strength he had to treat her less than humanly for 6 long weeks until she finally gave in to her own desire for affection. Just after 6 weeks of silent confinement, Eve returned. She telephoned Braxton. The conversation was brief. "Meet me at my house at 6. Don't be late. I need to see you." Finishing the conversation, she hung up. Braxton smiled his wolfish smile. He had just enough time to shower, shave, and get to Eve's house on time. When he arrived, all the lights in the house were out. He wondered briefly if anyone was home. He walked to the front door and confidently rang the bell. Eve answered only a moment later, flicking the key fob to lock the cameras, and quickly ushered him into the house, closing the door. "Martin is at a conference in Jacksonville right now. He won't be back until tomorrow." There was no explanation, no flirting, nothing. Braxton knew what call entertainment was. This was nothing more than entertainment. He quickly got into bed, and at that moment Eve entered the room with 2 glasses of white wine. She handed one to Braxton and settled into bed, adjusting the pillows to talk. "Rules." She said, "You're not staying the night. You'll leave when I tell you to, okay?" Braxton took a sip of wine and nodded. "Crystal," he said, "then finish your wine and get to work. You almost cost me my marriage. Do it, Braxton, or this is the last time you'll have me. I mean it." Braxton wasted no time. After they got to the point, she said, "That's it, I'm done for the day. Get your clothes and get out of here." Braxton didn't like being used. "Who said you could call the shots?" "Me. Now get out. I'll lock the doors when you leave." Things were boiling inside Braxton. He'd already told her husband that he'd entertained her. This time, he decided to test his strength. He didn't really have any cards to play. Stepping onto the floor at Martin's side of the bed, he felt something nudge his foot. He lifted his toes slightly, figuring there was something under the bed. When he lowered his fingers to the floor, he felt something metallic touch them. Just as he was about to pull away, a clanking sound shook him and Eve. He tried to pull his leg away but found he couldn't move it. He told Eve to quickly turn on the light. She turned on the bedside lamp. "My God, Braxton, what the hell is going on with you? I said get out of my house." She looked closely at Braxton's contorted face and realized something was seriously wrong. "What is it?" "I can't feel anything anymore. My leg. I can't feel my leg." He screamed in pain. Eva got out of bed and walked over to his bed. She turned on Martin's bedside lamp and took a closer look. She recoiled in shock when she saw that Braxton's foot was caught in a bear-like trap. "What have you done to me?" "Shut up, Braxton. I didn't do anything. But I think my husband did. Damn, this doesn't look good. Just don't move." Eve didn't know what to do. He begged Eva to call 911. Martin's phone alerted him that the cameras were off again, but this time he knew that wasn't the case. He also asked his security company to reprogram the cameras so that they would transmit on multiple frequencies, bypassing the jammer that Eve had used to hide her illicit communication. He turned to a cloud server to watch what was happening in real time. After some fun and games, when Eva suggested Braxton leave, he stepped on a mousetrap. In this case, it was more of a bear trap, but Martin decided it was best to be reassured. A broken fingernail was hardly punishment enough for stealing his wife, so Martin opted for an upgraded model from the local sports store. "Eva, I need to go to the hospital. I don't even want to think about what will happen if I don't get this trap off me. Give me my cell phone so I can call 911. Please, I'm begging you as one person to another. You have to get help," Braxton pleaded with Eve. Eve was in a panic. She didn't know what to do. If she called 911, they'd respond, of course, but they'd probably start an investigation. She was as trapped as Braxton was. She walked over to her high-backed chair and sank heavily into it. Eve had always considered herself a decent person, though in truth she could be called selfish. She remembered that Martin had been so serious when he had proposed to her. He wanted to make sure she knew the consequences of infidelity. "Trust," he'd said, "is more important than almost every other quality in a person. Without it, there is no relationship." Those were his words. Martin would never trust her again, no matter the circumstances. They would never have a relationship again, no matter the outcome. Eva was practically comatose. She was no longer seeking Braxton's help. She sat in her chair and stared into space. She knew Martin had set a trap. She knew her marriage was over. And now Martin had lured her lover into a life-threatening trap. He'd also trapped her. To save Braxton, she would have to expose herself. An affair would cost her the trust of Sachet's board of directors. It could lead to the collapse of her board. Martin continued to watch the video as he watched the human drama unfold. He realized that his marriage was over. He might get in trouble with the authorities for the bear trap under his bed, but Eve would be of no help unless he turned to her for help. Braxton looked like he desperately needed her. He considered calling home, but decided to let Eve roast the goose herself. Braxton looked pale. Martin thought there was still time for Eva to do the right thing. He decided to call her again, but he refused. Gina had already gotten out of the shower. He heard the hairdryer provided by the hotel turn on. He was about to turn it off when Eva went to the closet and pulled out a gun. Martin knew she kept it for personal defense. Several times a year, she took it with her to the shooting range to practice. She was a pretty good shot. She took aim at Braxton. Perhaps, she thought, she was putting him out of his misery. At the last second, Braxton raised his head and looked into her cold, lifeless eyes, watching his life pass before him. She pulled the trigger, but the shot landed in Martin's pillow. Martin sat on the edge of the bed. He watched Braxton with horror. He did not seem to be hit. A few moments passed and Gina entered the bedroom as Martin was closing the lid of his iPad. "Sweetheart, remember when I said you were capable of controlling Sasha with your eyes closed?" "I remember, but I thought you were just flattering me. I was sure you didn't mean it, even though you tried to convince me otherwise." Gina replied coquettishly. "Ah, but I really did mean it. And now I think you'll get your chance. It's just a matter of time. Why don't we do something? Only if you promise you'll never do it with your whore wife again. I don't like sharing." She quickly replied, "Don't worry, my love. I have been faithful to you since we first bonded in marriage. Besides, I think she's going to be a little busy for the next 20, 30 years. Epilogue. Police were called after Martin and Eva's neighbors heard a gunshot. They arrived in full tactical gear, fearing a home invasion. They all wondered why they hadn't been alerted sooner, since the cameras were recording and directly transmitting data to the security company. If one of the doors had been broken into, it would have been immediately reported to the security company, who would have called the police. The scene they saw upon entering the house resembled something out of a horror movie. There was a woman in a bathrobe lying on the bed. In her right hand was a gun. Next to her lay a man. The pillow on the left side of the bed showed a single gunshot wound. The police officers were unable to determine the severity of the injuries. They immediately called paramedics and firefighters who began assessing the condition of the victims. After clearing every room in the house, they waited for the rest of the emergency personnel. Eva seemed to be perfectly fine but was unable to speak. The police officers attempted to question her but preferred that the paramedics take her to the hospital. The man, whose identity remained unknown, was eventually freed from the bear trap by firefighters. Using the jaws of life, they opened the trap and extracted his leg. Eva recovered from all physical symptoms by the next morning. Her mental condition stayed with her much longer. She was unable to speak. She was charged with possession of a deadly weapon, use of a deadly weapon to inflict bodily injury, and failure to render aid as Braxton suffered life-threatening injuries. She was also charged with unlawful discharge of a firearm. She was found incompetent to stand trial, and the judge sent her to a mental hospital for treatment, where she remained for the rest of her life. Braxton survived. He went on to say that the bear trap was set by Eva's husband, but his words went unheard. Eva was married. He should never have gotten into bed with Eva in the first place. The police decided that if he was stupid enough to have fun with another man's wife, he would get what he deserved. Martin finally convinced the board of directors that Gina should take over as press secretary and CEO. She was 10 years younger than Eva and had a sincerity that would soon fade if Eva couldn't return to her duties. Gina was very familiar with the way Eva ran the company. Being her personal assistant, she also knew all the people in the industry that Eva interacted with. The board of directors had agreed to Eva's absence, not wanting the company's stock to drop in value during this time. In addition, they wanted to distance themselves from Eva to avoid a scandal. Gina proved that she was as beautiful as she was capable of running the company. Following the last fragrance, she released a new one. She always wanted to give the fragrance a name, so she called it Secrecy. It too proved to be very popular. She advertised it the same way Eva had advertised her fragrance last year. But there was one key difference. Martin, as her husband, accompanied her on every mile of the 30,000-mile journey. The end. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Subscribe to my channel and stay tuned for the next videos.